Let's cover the 2019 NBA draft. It's an exciting one. The draft is less than 24 hours away, and there's a slurry of potential trades and assortment of picks, which could happen by the time the 60th pick is announced. So we've already had some potential trades revealed by NBA media, and a handful of upcoming picks essentially locked into place. So let's look at what we already know, and then we'll follow that up with what we should be expecting to happen in the draft. Let's open with what we know for sure about the 2019 NBA draft. With the first pick of the draft, the New Orleans Pelicans are going to be taking Zion Williamson of Duke University. So this one's a no-brainer. Zion is as surefire of a number one pick as there has ever been. The Pelicans traded their star player in Anthony Davis for young talent. They've said they want Zion. He said he's interested in New Orleans. There's not really much else to talk about here. The Pelicans are looking to build for the future, and Zion is their pick to be the franchise cornerstone alongside Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram. We know for sure Zion is going number one. Number two, Grizzlies definitely going to be taking Ja Morant. This is all but guaranteed. They traded Mike Conley within the last 12 hours, so they know they're in need of a point guard. He's been the favourite to go as the number two pick since the tournament, regardless of who had the second pick. This is not a pick for fit necessarily. I think that any team that was going second was going to take him. He fits nicely alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. The Grizz just acquired a wing in Jay Crowder. They did get Korver 2 in the Mike Conley trade, but I don't think Korver's going to stay there. He's either going to be bought out or he's going to be waived and signed for a minimum deal on another team. Maybe the Lakers, maybe Golden State. The contenders are going to be asking for him. With the third pick, we know the Knicks are going to take RJ Barrett. Now this is the least guaranteed out of the three top picks. There's been some minor circlings of the Knicks trading the pick for the right price, but I definitely don't see any other player going third. Not necessarily because they haven't earned it. There's a lot of players in this draft. Well, not a lot, but there's a couple of players in this draft that could easily be taken third. RJ Barrett's the obvious pick at this point. He's garnered so much national attention. He was a number two player coming out of high school, I believe. He's had a pretty decent season at Duke University, averaging about 22 points per game behind Zion. So there's really no reason that he shouldn't be going third here. So that's all that's guaranteed or close to guaranteed at this point. I want to take a step down. Let's look at some likelihoods, things that are probably going to happen, but they're not 100% certain. And that's New Orleans takes Jarrett Culver with the fourth pick. So they already have two elite guards in Drew Holiday and Lonzo Ball, who are both going to be sharing ball handling duties. I think it's unlikely they're going to be taking Darius Garland with the fourth pick, considering he's an undersized point guard as is. Culver adds a nice wing player. There's some depth to come off the bench that New Orleans needs. They've got a few decent players, but with the renouncing of Julius Randle, obviously they're going to need some more scoring off the bench. There's not really any reason that I personally know of that they shouldn't take him. I don't think he has any injury history, doesn't have any chemistry issues that was happening in college. There's no reason they shouldn't take him as far as we're aware. But the fourth pick does have some nice trade value. It could be used to acquire a center, something in the same kind of realm as Clint Capella, or maybe a shooter at the 5 spot. Even though there's not really any three-point shooting centers that are worth the fourth pick that take the Pelicans timeline. There are some three-point shooting centers that might fit, something along the lines of Dwayne Dedman as a role-playing kind of veteran shooter to play the 5 position. But he's worth not as much as a number 4 pick in the draft. So I don't think they'd make that. In terms of Brook Lopez, he said he wants to re-sign in Milwaukee. And while the Milwaukee cap space is an issue with Chris Middleton likely to sign a max contract, they have just taken on a different contract in John Lua to try and free up some cap space. About $4 million, but I see that going more towards Malcolm Brogdon, potentially Chris Middleton's contract. So there's not really any three-point shooting centers worth a number 4 draft pick that would suit the Pelicans timeline. Next, the likelihood. Darius Garland falls out of the top 5. Now, the reason that I think this could happen is because he's an undersized point guard in a draft where none of the top 5 teams are in search of a point guard outside of Memphis. Memphis is obviously going to be taking Ja Morant because he's the second best player in this draft, as is predicted. So there's not really any other teams in the top 5 that are looking for an undersized point guard. He's definitely talented enough to go top 5 in most drafts, but based on the fit with the Cavs who are picking 5th, they don't really need a replacement for Colin Sexton, who's an undersized combo guard as is. It's a bad idea to run two 6'2" guards next to each other in a league with players like Ben Simmons, Alonzo, and D'Angelo Russell. The new era is big point guards, and I just don't think two small guards running the offense, having no defense, I don't think that's going to get you anywhere that you want to be. Potentially, he could be taken fifth and used as a trade piece. Add him on to Kevin Love, and you could get a nice, decent, good young player. But I just don't think teams are going to be going for a Kevin Love and Darius Garland trade. And I don't think the Cavs, if they do want a young piece, I don't think it's going to be Darius. He just doesn't fit with the rest of the roster. Another likelihood. Bol Bol goes lottery. Yeah, I think this is a likelihood. He's been a major impressment at his team workouts. 7'2", shoots the ball, handles the ball amazingly for someone over 7 feet. He's bound to be an elite shot blocker at his size, no matter what his shot timing is. With a player the size of Rudy Gobert almost, in terms of length and height, you're bound to get lots of blocks, whether you want to or not, okay? He's definitely much more agile than the typical player at over 7 feet. If you look at his agility runs and how he uses his feet, his footwork, how he gets around in the paint, how he gets around on the perimeter, he's definitely an agile 7-footer. The only reason he is obviously not a top 5 pick is because of his injury. He had surgery, missed most of the season with Oregon, but you could definitely argue that he has the most upside out of any player in this draft outside of Zion, and potentially the most potential in this draft. He could also be out of the league, though, depending on his recovery and depending on how he fits on the team, whether he's really agile enough to play the 5 at the next level. We don't really know until we see his performance against NBA level players. For me personally, I don't think there's any reason a team picking anywhere from 10th to 14th shouldn't take a flyer on him. It's really unlikely you get a superstar player in the lottery, in the back half of the lottery. You've had a few good ones. Guys like Kawhi and Giannis weren't even lottery picks. They were both picked 15th in their respective drafts. So obviously it can happen. But if you look at the percentage of what player comes at a star level at each position, it's really unlikely to get someone from 10 to 14 as a star player. So I think taking Bol Bol as a 10th to 14th pick should happen. Next thing. Things that could happen, but could just as easily not happen. We're in the middle of the range here. First thing up, New Orleans trades the 4th pick. I think Jarrett Culver is probably not going to change their franchise. The Pelicans have been actively looking to acquire assets. They've taken on a horde of draft picks. They've taken on young talent. They want to acquire as much trade bait as they can, as much assets as they can, just so they can kind of stockpile, you know? So there's been some rumblings of the 4th pick being swapped down for 8 and 10 from Atlanta, but the source on that is a nobody Knicks insider. He doesn't really have the information that we need, okay? He doesn't know about the New Orleans front office. He doesn't have insider information there. You shouldn't really trust that information. It is worth looking into and considering for yourself if you think, could that happen? It could potentially happen. I don't think it's going to, but it's the kind of thing that on draft night, if the Pelicans are feeling like, you know what, we don't really want Jarrett Culver, it's the kind of thing that could happen. Atlanta's obviously going to be looking to jump up in the draft to get a star player, wing-type player to put next to Trae Young or John Collins. Jarrett Culver fits that mold pretty well. So it's the kind of thing that could happen. But in terms of the insider information that we've received so far, I definitely don't think it's worth putting money on. Next thing, mid-range. Cam Reddish falls out of the top 7. Yeah, so Cam Reddish was the number 3 player coming out of high school. He was touted as a really great wing scorer, mostly a shooter. He has a good skill set at 6'8", can play the 2, the 3, maybe the 4 in an undersized team if he wants to go small and have a shooter at the 4 position. Little bit thin for the 4 position, but in this league, there's a lot of thin 4s, so we'll see how that goes. He had a pretty disappointing season at Duke University, considering what he was touted as coming out of high school, but there's a lot of players that have disappointing college careers that go on to have really nice NBA careers. So I think take that with a grain of salt. We've seen what his skill set has touted him to be. So he's still a decent player. Don't forget that. He's still an elite player. He has the skill set to really stand out. He's a smooth wing scorer. He can really shoot the ball. He's a nice setup for the modern NBA. There's not a team that he wouldn't fit on, in my opinion. But teams are hesitant for whatever reason. So he could go 5th to the Cavs. He could just as easily fall to 8th at Atlanta. I definitely don't think he's falling past 8. Atlanta's definitely going to scoop him up at 8 if he's still there. He's got too much of an upside to not take with the 8th pick, especially with Atlanta in need of a wing scorer like Cam Reddish. We don't have a lot of intel at this point on where he's going, though. A lot of the time, you'll hear lots of noise about where a player has been working out, what front offices are interested in. You hear about a guy like RJ Barrett. There's been lots of noise out of the Knicks camp that they really like RJ Barrett, okay? But with Cam Reddish, we haven't heard anything. He had one meeting with the Lakers earlier on before the draft was kind of really starting to steamroll into the front line of news. But in terms of actual team intel, there's not a whole lot that's hit the front pages with Cam Reddish. Maybe that's because there's not as much interest in him after his season at Duke, but that also could just be because teams are not paying as much interest to him in terms of a top 5, 6, 7 pick. Next thing that could happen, but just as easily not happen, Tyler Hero, top 10 in the draft. He was an electrifying high school player. He was really a mixtape player. He had lots of really nice highlights, really dynamic scorer. He had a decent season in Kentucky. He shot some nice percentages, about 14 points per game. I think about 6.5 rebounds and maybe 4 assists. Those are pretty decent all-around numbers for a wing player. And he shot nice percentages, over 40% from 3. That's pretty respectable as a college player. I think his draft position is definitely dependent on who's available around that 8 to 15 pick. He could really go anywhere from in there. I personally don't think he should go above Rhea Hachimura, Bol Bol, or Sekou Doumbouya, but that's just my personal opinion. He did have nice percentages. Those low teens picks, that's the kind of thing that can really be a choice on the day. But with less than 24 hours to go until the draft, at this point, I think it's all about who's left down on that number 10 spot in the draft. Next player I think could possibly go top 10 is Doumbouya. This is because of the Giannis effect. Every team wants their own long, athletic European star. Doumbouya is a really, really nice player. I think he should go top 10. I'd love to have him on the Wolves at 11 if we don't get Hachimura, but he's definitely, without a doubt, a project player. Coming out of the EuroLeague, he wasn't a star, but he's only 18 and he has a huge upside. It's easy to believe he's the next Ntilikina as well, which could be a bit of an issue. Frank Ntilikina, for those who don't remember, had crazy hype coming out of France when he was drafted as a defensive stopper, athletic, rim runner. He could shoot the ball a little bit of everything, play make, and he just really hasn't really shown anything of value as of yet. He was taken over Dennis Smith Jr. Now, whether or not that's the right pick, they're playing on the same team now. Obviously, there'd be a little bit of competition there. But in terms of what we were touted for Ntilikina coming out of the EuroLeague, he really hasn't shown what we want of him. And that's the problem with Doumbouya. Teams could be looking at him as Ntilikina. They could be looking at him as Giannis. Just depends on how the front office sees these Euro players. Next scenario, the Wolves try to trade up to the 4th pick for Darius Garland. The Wolves are desperately in need of a point guard. They'd definitely like to ship Teague out as soon as they possibly can. Teague does not fit with the rest of this offense. Okay, he just doesn't. Garland definitely fits the timeline with a Kogi, Towns, a Wiggins more, a nice young player to really run the offense. It's possible, we know they have their eyes on him, but there's also that unlikelihood because the Wolves don't really have the trade assets to get it done. Unless they ship out the 11th pick, they're going to need to ship out Saric in all likelihood. The 4th pick is going to the Pelicans. They want young players. They want assets. The Wolves don't really have the assets that the Pelicans want. It's possibly going to need more than the 11th pick and Dario Saric, who had an underperforming season with the Timberwolves. The teams are not really high on Dario Saric at the moment. Next up, things that are possible, but definitely unlikely. Bol Bol goes top 5. The Pelicans could definitely take a swing in the dark and take that center at 5th to fill out their starting lineup and have a killer starting 5 if he's healthy. The Cavs could also take a flyer at 5th, but that's even more unlikely because they're looking to ship out Kevin Love and they clearly want youth and they want picks. We saw that with the John Henson, Matthew Dellavedova trade, taking on contracts to get future first rounders. That's the kind of thing they're aiming for. They like Larry Nance, they like Colin Sexton. They want to kind of fill out the squad in that scenario. because they're looking out to ship out Kevin Love, it's easy to think that they could find a spot for him and acquire some other picks in the process once Love is shipped out. The thing is that Bol Bol could definitely still be available later in the draft. So I think if they're going to try to acquire a first round pick to take Bol Bol in a Kevin Love deal, they might as well try for him as a later pickup. I definitely don't think he's going as one of those top kind of 6-7 picks. So if they're going to take a flyer on Bol Bol, they're going to be trading down for a lower pick in the draft. Another unlikely scenario, the Pelicans trade up for number 2 for RJ Barrett. There's been some rumblings about this, that the Pelicans want a dynamic wing scorer who can swap between the 2 and the 3. The thing is that they might not really believe in some of the young guys that they just picked up from LA. Brandon Ingram has been so considering he was touted as a great Kevin Durant-light number 2 scoring pick. Depends if the Pelicans really believe in what he brings to the table. I think Lonzo Ball, out of all the players that they've acquired, definitely has the highest upside. That's just my personal opinion. I know the Pelicans really like Lonzo and his pairing with Zion Williamson, so maybe they want a scorer like RJ Barrett to kind of fill out that need for scoring in the starting lineup. It's not impossible that they would believe in Barrett more than guys like Ingram or Hart. Plus, he's really good friends with Zion, so that's going to do their franchise a whole lot of good in the future when it's time to talk about contract extensions. When they have both guys who really like each other on the team, obviously they're going to be more inclined to want to extend if they're on the same team. Again, though, this is really unlikely to happen because the Pelicans are definitely more interested in acquiring assets, and we know that they think Culver is their guy. Plus, Barrett doesn't have a whole lot of draw at this point with front offices outside the Knicks. Everyone's kind of set the sun on RJ Barrett just because they all think he's definitely going to the Knicks. So there's not really much point in kind of gauging interest on him. They think he's going to end up on the Knicks. He's probably going to end up on the Knicks. So with this all in mind, I've made a mock lottery draft on how I think the lottery is going to turn out with just a little pinch of how I want it to turn out. So this is what it looks like. This is how I think the draft lottery is going to turn out. There's a few picks in here that I haven't explained in the podcast thus far. So let's get stuck into those so I can explain myself a little bit better before you start writing your hate comments. Number 1, Darius Garland to Phoenix. I think Phoenix would love to have him. They've needed a point guard for years, and he's a great young player. They probably have been scouting more for Kobe White at this point because they've really needed a point guard, and they probably don't think Darius Garland is going to stay down all the way down to the 6th pick. But I just don't think the Cavs want him. As a 6'2 guard, I just don't think the Cavs want him. So this would be a no-brainer for Phoenix if Darius Garland is still available at 6. Next one, Chicago. They also need a point guard. There's only one decent one left, and that's Kobe White. Also a no-brainer here. I don't think the Chicago Bulls believe in Chris Dunn. They've been shopping him. He was shopped early on coming out of Minnesota. Chris Dunn's going to be one of those guys. He might find himself on a few more teams before his career's over. Next up, Reddish to the Hawks at number 8. He's definitely going to the Hawks if he falls down to number 8. I feel like Atlanta would take the flyer. They definitely don't want to risk Washington ending up with him at number 9. He's a great player to take at number 8. He could definitely go higher, but this is all dependent purely on the Cavs and the Bulls. Phoenix will also definitely take Kobe White over him, even if Garland is taken before they can pick him at number 6. Kobe White is going over Cam Reddish. That's my opinion. Hachimura to Washington. I really hope this doesn't happen. I don't want this to happen. I like Hachimura, and he's just going to get stuck in a horrible situation there in Washington. But he's just too good to fall below the 9th pick in the draft, in my opinion. I don't see how he can fall below 9. I don't want Atlanta to get Reddish and Hachimura either, so maybe that's just a little bit of my own opinion, but I've stuck him in at the 9th pick going to Washington. Let's look at Doumbouya going 10th. Again, Atlanta has a couple of mid-lottery picks here, so I don't see why they wouldn't go for a young, athletic scoring forward who runs the floor, he rebounds, he'd be a nice fit next to Trae Young. I like him in Atlanta. Nasir Little to Minnesota. This is probably a less likely pick, but the Wolves defense could definitely do with some improvement, and Nasir Little is a nice little energy player. We've already got Covington, who, when healthy, is definitely in that Defensive Player of the Year conversation, but Little could definitely be able to play some small ball 4 or come in when Robert Covington's not out on the floor. He's got some dynamicy to him. I like Nasir Little coming to the Timberwolves. Next, Jackson Hayes to the Charlotte Hornets with the 12th pick. He's a low points per game, big forward/center. That's all you need to hear. Charlotte already in love with him. If he were white, they would trade up to number 1 to take him. Charlotte, I'm sorry, your GM is obsessed with drafting big white players. Okay, that's just a fact. Jackson Hayes is the closest thing they're going to get unless they want to go way down. And I wouldn't put it past them, man. They've got some unhealthy obsession with big white centers, but whatever, man. Whatever floats your boat. At the 13th pick, I've got Tyler Herro to Miami. They'd like some dynamic action on the floor, in my opinion. They'd like a wing. There's no point guards left. They need a center. Bam's on the come up. They want someone to pair with him on the wing. This makes sense to me. Josh Richardson shoots the ball. Justice Winslow playmakes. Tyler Herro gets some nice scoring in. I don't see why they wouldn't take him here. He's dynamic. He's athletic. He's fun to watch. Get some box office tickets while we're waiting for these contracts to run out. This is what's going to happen, in my opinion. And the last one, number 14. I had Bol Bol going to Boston. Al Horford's gone. Boston's going young. They flamed out in free agency. They lost Kyrie Irving. I think they should take Bol Bol to sell some tickets and make a stab at the playoffs. I personally think he should actually be going higher. But in terms of his injury and how he's been touted, what we've heard from NBA media in terms of his interest within the teams, I'm not sure if we're going to see him go higher than 14. We could potentially even see him fall down late first, early second. We just don't know at this point what the team level of interest is in Bol Bol. This episode of the Trash Talk Podcast will not be available in audio-only form. To contact the Trash Talk Podcast, please follow the links in the description to my Twitter and to the podcast's official Twitter.